Landfill expansion proposals hit the rocks. Hong Kong demands answers from the U.S. over hacking allegations. And Julia Gillard ousted as Australia's Prime Minister.
Good evening. The government has shelved its plan to expand the Chung Kwan O landfill amid strong opposition from residents there. It also postponed the funding request for 2 other sites. Evelina Leung has our top story.
The government announced its decision to shelve its plan to expand the Chung Kwan O landfill at the start of LegCo Public Works Subcommittee meeting this morning. The fate of the project was sealed last night when members of the Federation of Trade Unions and the Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong indicated they would vote against it. Still, the Secretary for the Environment pledged to continue to lobby for support after announcing measures earlier to reduce the impact on residents.
I think the point is that the lawmakers and also the society would like to see more concrete progress of those committed improvement measures, so that I think would like to carry out those improvements as soon as possible.
Sai Kung District Councillor Christine Fong and her supporters, who held a hunger strike outside LegCo to oppose the plan, welcomed the government's decision. But they said this is just a small victory, and their ultimate goal is to get the government to shut down the landfill. The government also wants to expand 2 other landfills in Tuen Mun and Ta Koo Ling.
I feel that if we really have a problem, all 3 regions should share the burden. But now government pull out 1 region and expect the other 2 to carry the extra burden of a daily 1,000 trucks going to Chung Kwan O is now going to be diverted to the other 2 landfills. That to me is totally unfair.
Tian said he will vote against the expansion of the other 2 landfills. The government today delayed the funding request for those sites. The DAB says it wants answers on how the negative impact on local people can be minimized if the Tuen Mun site is expanded. Ta Koo Ling residents also expressed anger. Just because we are not as vocal as those who live in Chung Kwan O, it doesn't mean we are happy with the plan, and the government can push ahead with it in our area, this man said. Thomas Tam of the Hong Kong Waste Disposal Association now warns that when the Chung Kwan O site reaches full capacity, waste from Hong Kong Island will be sent to Tuen Mun instead. That would mean additional costs, which Tam said would eventually be transferred to taxpayers. The expansion of the Ta Koo Ling and Tuen Mun landfill will be discussed in the next Public Works Subcommittee meeting, which the government hopes will take place before the Legislative Council summer break. Evelina Leung, TVB News.
Turning now to the Edward Snowden saga, Washington has warned that the case could affect a bid by Hong Kong to win visa-free access for travelers to the United States. Meanwhile, the government here is disappointed that the Obama administration has still not responded to claims by the whistleblower that U.S. authorities hacked local computer systems. Jenny Lam has that story.
America's most wanted man might have slipped out of Hong Kong, but the fallout continues. The U.S. State Department warned yesterday that the way the Hong Kong government handled the case could affect its bid to secure visa-free access to America for local people.
What would be the repercussion of U.S.-China relations or U.S.-Hong Kong relations in terms of Hong Kong's plan to obtain or to become a member of U.S. visa waiver program?
Again, as I said, I'm just not going to get into it, but clearly, these issues have an impact when we have a breakdown in cooperation on such a key issue.
The U.S. State Department has expressed concern on whether Snowden's disclosure of American surveillance programs involved cyber espionage activities. Meanwhile, here in Hong Kong, legislators today asked the government if it has the know-how to prevent cyber attacks. Secretary for Security Lai Tung-kwok promised to follow up on Snowden's claims that the U.S. hacked local computer systems. Lai added he's disappointed that the Obama administration has yet to respond to Hong Kong's demand for clarification made last Friday relating to those hacking allegations. He called on Washington to give a full and comprehensive response to the people of Hong Kong. Jenny Lam, TVB News.
Now, regarding Edward Snowden's whereabouts, Russian President Vladimir Putin confirms that the whistleblower is in the transit area of a Moscow airport. But as Alan Booknia reports, Putin has ruled out handing him over to Washington.
Because Snowden is staying in the airport's transit lounge, the Russian leader said he doesn't need a visa, so there's no reason to expel him. During a visit to Finland, Putin told a news conference that Russia and the U.S. have no extradition treaty anyway, so he dismissed U.S. criticism as ravings and rubbish. In his first public comment since Snowden flew in on Sunday, Putin appeared to make light of the diplomatic uproar over the fugitive. He likened the situation to shearing a pig, saying there's a lot of squealing, but not much wool. While visiting Saudi Arabia, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry made another appeal to Russia to hand over Snowden.
There is no extradition treaty, but there are standards of behavior between sovereign nations. There is common law, there is respect for rule of law, and we would simply call on our friends in Russia to respect the fact that a partner nation, a co-member of the Permanent Five of the United Nations, has made a normal request under legal systems for law to be upheld.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro waded into the controversy. Maduro said during a visit to Haiti that while he had not received an official request for asylum from Snowden, he'd consider one on the grounds of humanitarian protection. Meanwhile, in Ecuador, the country believed to be Snowden's preferred destination, people are torn over the position the country could be put in should it grant him asylum. While the initial response was favorable to taking him in, many Ecuadorians are now openly wondering if, with the country's economic ties with the U.S., Ecuador could be the one with the most to lose in the high-stakes international showdown. Alan Booknia, TVB News.
The 3 astronauts on board the Shenzhou 10 spacecraft have returned safely to Earth after completing their 15-day mission. China's space program said the work of the astronauts marks a key step toward achieving the country's goal of building a permanent manned space station by 2020. Jenny Lam reports.
The re-entry module carrying the 3 Shenzhou 10 astronauts landed safely just after 8 o'clock this morning in Inner Mongolia. Commander Nie Haishang, followed by Wang Yaping and Zhang Xiaoguang, emerged to a welcoming ceremony. They were all in good physical condition. The earth beneath my feet feels familiar, Commander Nie remarked. Zhang and Wang, the country's second female astronaut, describe themselves as dreamers who have just fulfilled their dreams. The commander-in-chief of China's manned space program, Zhang Youxia, called the Shenzhou 10 mission a complete success. Compared with last year's Shenzhou 9 mission, the latest trip was no longer experimental. The Shenzhou 10 is China's first application-oriented spaceflight with an applicable shuttle system transporting astronauts and supplies to orbiting modules. The astronauts tested technologies for docking, support for their stay in space, and construction of a space station in future. The Shenzhou 10 docked with the Tiangong 1 Space Lab twice, automatically and manually. The astronauts spent 12 days in the orbiting space module to conduct medical experiments and to deliver a lecture to students on Earth about the principles of physics. During that lecture, Wang explained the motion in microgravity environments and the surface tension of liquid in space with several demonstrations. China has sent 10 astronauts and 6 spacecraft into space since the country's first manned space mission a decade ago. Jenny Lam, TVB News.
Deadly violence rocked Xinjiang today. Riots in a remote town there left 27 people dead. The unrest happened at about 6 a.m. in Shanshan County in Turpan Prefecture. According to the Xinhua news agency, knife-wielding mobs attacked police stations, a local government building, and a construction site. People were stabbed and police cars set ablaze. 17 people were killed. Authorities later opened fire and shot dead 10 rioters. 3 others were arrested at the scene while an undisclosed number of rioters managed to escape. No word yet on what sparked the unrest.
Major political drama coming out of Australia today. With elections less than 3 months away, Prime Minister Julia Gillard was ousted by her predecessor, Kevin Rudd. The ruling Labour Party today dumped Gillard and elected Rudd as Prime Minister in a dramatic move to try and head off defeat at the upcoming polls. The vote was 57 to 45. Earlier, Gillard promised to quit politics if she lost the ballot. 3 years ago, Rudd was himself dumped in favor of Gillard, who became Australia's first female prime minister. Rudd was elected prime minister back in 2007, and his government was credited with helping Australia avoid recession during the 2008 global financial crisis.
Well, thank you for gathering.
Temperatures are rising, the sea level is climbing, the Arctic ice is melting, and the world is doing far too little to stop it. Against that backdrop, U.S. President Barack Obama has launched a plan to cut carbon emissions from American power plants without requiring congressional approval first. And he's linked the fate of a pipeline designed to carry crude oil from Canada to the U.S. to its impact on climate change. Moving oil to market by train, truck, or tanker significantly adds to global greenhouse gas emissions. This is why, during his speech at Georgetown University, President Barack Obama said going green by limiting carbon emissions is the only way he'd give the green light to the Keystone XL pipeline.
And our national interest will be served only if this project does not significantly exacerbate the problem of carbon pollution. The net effects of the pipeline's impact on our climate will be absolutely critical to determining whether this project is allowed to go forward.
The pipeline is designed to carry 830,000 barrels of crude oil per day from the Canadian oil sands and the Bakken Shale in North Dakota and Montana south to Texas refineries. But critics warn the environmental costs far outweigh the project's economic benefits of creating jobs in the U.S. Environmentalists maintain extracting crude from the oil sands in northern Alberta will produce an excessive amount of carbon pollution. Still, Obama believes if America doesn't try out the Keystone project, it will pay the price of inaction.
So the question now is whether we will have the courage to act before it's too late. And how we answer will have a profound impact on the world that we leave behind, not just to you, but to your children and to your grandchildren.
The White House insists the State Department has the final say, with Obama's input to approve it only if it won't increase greenhouse gases. A final decision is expected by January 2014.
And still ahead in the news, ProGovernment Group challenges Occupy Central movement. The Eiffel Tower shut down because of a labor dispute. And Elizabeth Taylor's first wedding dress up for auction.
And welcome back. A pro-government group is planning to run a campaign to counter the Occupy Central movement. And it will hold a carnival on Monday to celebrate the 16th anniversary of the handover. Rachel Lung reports.
Hong Kong's return to Chinese rule is a cause for celebration, says the Voice of Loving Hong Kong. And on the 16th anniversary of the handover next Monday, they will hold a carnival outside the Cultural Center in Tsim Sha Tsui. They fear groups like Scholarism, which organized last year's campaign against national education, may mislead young people.
They have even more violent action than the adult now. And we concerned about all this kind of worsened situation in Hong Kong.
The event is expected to cost an estimated $70,000, coming from donations and its own members. But the group said the money did not come from any single organization. It also plans to gather 10,000 people over the coming year in a campaign to counter the Occupy Central movement. While Occupy Central may be reaching out to young supporters through social network, Voice of Loving Hong Kong will ask the Secretary for Education next month to spread their message to children to love their city and not take part in what they believe might be unlawful activities. But former Chief Secretary for Administration, Anson Chan, sees no reason to celebrate almost 1 year after Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying took office. Speaking on a radio program this morning, she cited the latest opinion polls that show negative ratings for the government in its handling of economic, livelihood, and political issues. Chan believes a lack of trust between Leung and his senior officials is to blame. Rachel Leung, TVB News.
The prosecution in the trial of businessman Peter Chan told the jury today the case against Chan rests not only on facts but also on common sense. Chan is accused of forging the will of the late tycoon Nina Wong and using it to inherit her wealth. Chen Lammy Smith has more.
The man formerly known as Tony Chan sat quietly in court, often with his eyes closed and rolling his head as if trying to relax while he listened to the prosecution attack his testimony. Queen's counsel David Perry explained to the jury that it wasn't the prosecution's responsibility to prove when the disputed will was created or even whether Chan wrote it himself, just that it needs to be proven that Chan played a part in creating it. The prosecution explained that Nina Wang made it clear several times while she was alive that she wanted to leave her estate to the China Chem Charitable Foundation to give back to society. The barrister also brought up a statement by Chan saying Wang was a miser and that she told him off for spending $30 million on a private jet. Perry argued it was illogical for such a skilled businesswoman who wanted to give to charity to give all her money to someone with a bad business record whose spending she disagreed with. He accused Chan of preying on a vulnerable, superstitious and gullible woman to get rich. He said the self-styled feng shui master claimed to possess supernatural powers in being able to find Wang's kidnapped husband in the 1990s and in being able to prolong her life when she suffered from cancer. Perry also cast doubt on Chan's claims that he and Wang were lovers. The prosecution will finish addressing the jurors tomorrow, then it's the defense's turn. Only next Wednesday will the jury retire to consider its verdict. Etienne Lamy Smith, TVB News.
A deeply divided U.S. Supreme Court threw out the 1965 Voting Rights Act. That's the most powerful part of the landmark law that gave voting rights to minorities in the face of sometimes violent opposition. The court challenged Congress to come up with a replacement plan to protect blacks and other minorities in places where discrimination persists. More from NBC News.
The ruling deals a crippling and potentially fatal blow to the law signed by President Johnson in 1965, a response to widespread efforts in the South to prevent blacks from voting.
We're marching today to dramatize to the nation.
Civil rights veteran John Lewis, now a Georgia congressman, watched as the law was signed.
Without the Voting Rights Act of 1965, there would be no Barack Obama as President of the United States of America. We've come too far, made too much progress to go back.
This decision represents a serious setback for voting rights and has the potential to negatively affect millions of Americans across the country.
In a 5-4 ruling, the court's conservatives said the areas covered by the Voting Rights Act have changed, but the law has not kept up. The act requires states with a history of voter discrimination to get permission from the federal government before changing how they conduct elections. The court left that part intact, but it struck down the map, the coverage formula of where that requirement applies. That's all of 9 mostly southern states and parts of 6 others. Chief Justice John Roberts said the map is based on decades-old data and eradicated practices. In 5 of the covered southern states, he said, African Americans have a higher voter turnout percentage than whites. Opponents of the law, who helped Shelby County, Alabama, challenge it, hailed the ruling.
We've just elected a black president of the Shelby County Board of Education over a white incumbent in a countywide election.
African Americans are an integral part of Southern political life, and that's a good thing, and that's never going to change.
But writing for the court's 4 dissenters, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said gutting the law that has helped end voter discrimination is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet. Civil rights groups vowed to rally the same kind of action from Congress they got 48 years ago.
The reality is the only way Congress will act is if we call, if we march, if we pressure, if we make clear that we do not intend to go backwards on voting.
One state, Texas, responded immediately, saying it would start enforcing one of the nation's strictest voter ID laws, something the federal government tried to stop.
To Paris now, where the Eiffel Tower's elevators ground to a halt yesterday because of a labor dispute. Operators say it's the most visited paid-for monument in the world. Workers went on strike in a dispute over pay and the company's profit-sharing policy. They're also addressing complaints over repairs to the tower that have taken more than twice as long as expected. Chris, what exciting sports do you have for us today?
Well, still Confederations Cup stuff, and it's pretty good. Brazil plays Uruguay tonight in the first of the Confederations Cup semifinals. Meanwhile, in other football news, Argentina international Carlos Tevez has a new home. He's moving to Italian side Juventus after 4 turbulent years at Manchester City. Jameson Wong has more.
Think about it for a minute. He lasted longer in Manchester City than former feud mate Roberto Mancini and fellow headline maker Mario Balotelli. Manchester City and Juventus have agreed on a deal to send Carlos Tevez to Italy. The transfer is worth up to £12 million. Tevez made 148 appearances for the Sky Blues and scored 74 goals. A couple of high-profile managerial changes. Carlo Ancelotti is moving to Spain to lead Real Madrid. Last season, the 54-year-old Italian guided Paris Saint-Germain to their first title in 19 years. And Laurent Blanc will take over at PSG. It's believed the former France manager was not the club's first choice, nor second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, but eighth choice. Hey, a gig's a gig. Jameson Wong, TVB News.
At Wimbledon, easy first-round wins for the men's and women's top seeds Novak Djokovic and Serena Williams. Meanwhile, China's Li Na beat Michaela Krajicek of the Netherlands 6-1, 6-1. The former French Open champion was a quarter finalist in 2010. However, the number 6 seed has bowed out in the second round at the All England Club the past 2 years.
And finally, the first wedding dress of one of Hollywood's most iconic leading ladies will be auctioned off in London later today. I'm talking about the gown that the late Elizabeth Taylor wore when she married Conrad Hilton Jr. back in 1950. The Cleopatra beauty wore the dress when she was just 18 years old in her first of 8 marriages. The dress could fetch up to $75,000 US. And that's a lovely wrap of our news. Thanks for watching and good evening.
Good night.